This is Defender Radio. I'm Michael Howie, and this is Defender Radio, the podcast for wildlife advocates and animal lovers, brought to you by the Fur Bearers. North Atlantic right whales are at extreme risk of extinction, with only around 370 individuals and around 70 reproductive females left in the wild. According to rightwhales.org, over 142 individuals have been injured or died since 2017, a shocking 35% of the current population. Fortunately, individuals like Sheryl Fink of the International Fund for Animal Welfare, or IFAW, are working hard to collaborate and find solutions to protect this endangered whale species, who can be found off the coasts of Canada and the United States. To share more about how right whales reached such critically low levels, what the largest impacts on their populations are, and how scientific collaboration can lead to solutions, Sheryl joins Defender Radio. Let's get started with what right whales are. Are they whales that are more correct, or are they whales of a certain species or genus?
They were actually originally called the right whale because they were the right whale to kill back in the whaling days. This is because they were very slow. They tended to be at the surface, and they had a high level of blubber, so they would tend to float after they were harpooned. So unfortunately, that's why they were called the right whale. We'd like to say now that they're the right whale to save, not the right whale to kill.
Very nicely said. And what are we thinking in terms of the population estimates in North Atlantic right whales in Canadian waters, and how has it changed over the last few years?
It's actually a really serious situation. The most recent estimate just came out, and there's only about 372 of these whales remaining.
Wow.
And this is a population that sort of migrates or travels between Canada and the United States. So they give birth down in Georgia and northern Florida. It's sort of like the warmer waters in the nursery. And then they travel up to the cooler waters in Canada, primarily the Bay of Fundy and the Gulf of St. Lawrence, for feeding during the summer months. So they're traveling through this really heavily trafficked area. It's one of the heaviest shipping trafficked areas in the world, and also coming into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where we have a lot of fisheries where they can get entangled in fishing gear, and that's a huge problem for the species. They actually were increasing a little bit up until about, I was going to say 15 years ago. But unfortunately, since 2017, when they started moving more into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, we've been seeing this increased mortality primarily from fishing gear and ship strikes.
Well, and both of these sound like very manageable problems. We have satellites, we have, Kickstarter, we have all of these other tools available to us to gather resources and solve what sounds like a solvable problem. If we know that it's fishing gear, and we know that it's ship strikes and things like that, it stands to reason we'd be able to logically move forward, but it's not as easy as it sounds, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's the good news is we know what's killing right whales. It's us. 90% of these whales are dying from ship strikes or entanglement in fishing gear. They're not dying of natural causes. So, I mean, I guess that's the good news is we know what's causing it. The bad news is, it's a bit of a challenge. We're asking humans to change our ways. Trying to get ships to slow down is a big ask. There's so much shipping traffic. We all want our products tomorrow. We all want we don't see any delays. It's not just cargo ships, it's cruise ships, it's recreational boaters, it's all vessel traffic that needs to slow down. Fishing gear is one area where we're seeing a lot of progress. We're getting fishermen, particularly in Canada, crab fishermen who are testing and trying this new technology that it uses rope, but less rope in the water. It's really exciting, and that's one of the things we're working on, other organizations as well in Canada. And I think there's some really promising developments there that is a way of allowing the fishermen to continue to pursue their livelihoods, but without killing whales.
Well, and my immediate thought would be that it's massive amounts of, or a giant net, just one giant one that someone puts out there, and not knowing a lot about fishing commercially and angling, I imagine that it's less likely one giant net and a whole lot of small nets and small bits of gear that are sort of left out or get their way into the water and then into the ecosystem as a whole.
Yep. And it's not even so much nets, but these vertical lines. So it's primarily the lobster fishery and the crab fishery that whales are getting entangled in. So we think of these whales migrating up from Florida to Canada. They have to navigate through a maze of over 1 million fishing lines in the water.
Wow.
So vertical lines. So this is where you'd have a crab trap or a lobster trap on the bottom, and then a vertical line that goes to a buoy marking on the surface of the water where the pot is. The fishermen, this is the way we've been fishing for thousands of years, is they set their traps, there's a buoy, they go out, they find the buoy, they pull up the trap. So what we're trying to do now is there's new technology. Instead of having that vertical line from the trap on the bottom to the buoy on the top, the buoy is packaged up together with the trap on the bottom. And the fish, so there's no rope in the water. And then when the fisherman comes, he releases that buoy with an acoustic signal. It pops to the surface. He can see it, reaches over the boat with his grapple, grabs the buoy, brings his trap into the boat, resets the buoy down in the trap, and deploys it again. So instead of having those million vertical lines in the water, there's essentially no lines in the water if you're using this type of equipment. And it's really exciting. Like, we've seen a lot of progress since 2017 when we first realized that entanglement was such a huge problem. We've got the technology, it works. Fishermen are saying it works, as well as their traditional gear. There's still some problems in terms of different systems being able to talk to each other, and how is enforcement going to be able to monitor all this? They need to know where the traps are. Other fishermen who maybe aren't using this gear need to know where it is so that they don't lay their gear on top of it. So there's still issues to be worked out, but huge progress has been made. 2 years ago, crab harvesters in the Gulf of St. Lawrence got almost, I think it's 350,000 pounds of snow crab using this technology. So, we've come a long way. There's still a long way to go. I don't think anyone, at this point in time is saying all fisheries, all crab and lobster would convert to this, this system. But at least when the whales are in the area, or a right whale's been detected in the area, what they're doing now is they're closing those areas off to fishing. But if you're using this type of gear, then you're allowed to go in there and still fish.
That sounds shockingly reasonable and logical for government. Are there things going on sort of on the ground level that are really driving this? Is this sort of just someone presenting a good idea and someone in government saying, yep, let's do it? Or has there been a lot of collaboration, a lot of get-togethers to figure out if this could work, and then how it would work, and then the implementation? And like you're talking about, the common problem solving that arrives with any new technology.
There's been a ton of collaboration, as I said, particularly since 2017, when the right whales started coming into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and we started realizing the extent of the entanglement. And there's been a lot of progress, I think, in terms of the fishermen trusting environmental or animal organizations, and vice versa. I think at first there was a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear that, fisheries were going to be shut down, people were going to lose their livelihoods. But I think we're at a point now where we all understand we do need to work together. In terms of the bigger picture, of course, wouldn't it be lovely if our government just wanted to save whales and not have them go extinct? But the real driver here has been the United States Marine Mammal Protection Act. They have a provision, I guess you'd call it, but because it's a critically endangered species, Canada needs to show that we're doing as much or equivalent to protect them as they are in the United States, or the United States can prohibit imports of Canadian seafood products, which is a $2 billion industry and would be a tremendous economic loss. So I think from a political perspective, that's kind of what's driving the government to take action to stop killing these whales. It's the threat of losing one of our biggest seafood export market.
It seems surprising to me that the U.S. is leading the way over us on an environmental issue policy-wise. Is that surprising? Is it a thing that we see go both ways, or is that very much my built-in bias?
I think it goes both ways. We like to use examples of one to try to encourage the other to do better. Unfortunately, after the most recent election in the United States, there seems to be a lot of uncertainty as to what's going to happen in the future. We're really going to need to, keep the pressure on and keep this whale on people's awareness, radars, because only 370 of them. I was down at a right whale festival down in Florida last week, and most people didn't even know this whale existed. They're it's breeding right here. You can see them from shore and in Florida waters, and most people didn't even know it exists. It's just It's kind of a dumpy little whale. They're not the most majestic. They're not the majestic breachers like the humpbacks, that you see them in all of the promotional videos and stuff for travel. They're just like these cool little whales that we're killing.
Well, and speaking of sort of who the whales are a bit, I think it's an easy statement to say, they are a massive living sentient animal who's deserving of protections, but we also can talk a bit about ecological service and impact, and beyond an ethical reason to save them. There are very good scientific ones, and I have not looked this up yet. I am fully owning that. I've just found it, but whales.org states there's emerging research that demonstrates whales act as ecosystem engineers by providing nutrients to phytoplankton, which are the tiny ocean plants that create at least 50% of our oxygen and annually sequester hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon. So this is another one of those ways that we, or I, was not aware of, and the general public may not have been aware of, that it's not just that whales are these big, majestic, sentient animals who deserve protection, but without them, we could face a very real cataclysmic event in ecosystems in our oceans.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of those things that we're just starting to discover and learn more about. They call it the whale pump. But as you say, these whales, they feed at the bottom, perhaps, and then they come up to the surface and they poop at the surface, and that poop filters down through the water and it brings all the nutrients with it, and it kind of like percolates throughout the water column. They also play a really important role in transporting nutrients from the south to the north during their migration route. So, for example, from Florida up to the Gulf of St. Lawrence, they're like helping cycle nutrients in that direction as well. So, as you say, ecosystem engineers that play a really important role.
And one of the things that's just a fun fact is we can identify right whales by some of the bumps on their heads, which are called callosities. Callosities. I mean, I got there on the third try.
That's pretty, yeah. They're these little rough patches, and every whale has a very unique identifying mark. There's actually the library at the New England Aquarium where they have a catalog of all of the markings of all of the whales that have been identified.
Oh, that's cool.
And they all have, like, many of them, I say most of them have names. Every year there's like a contest or whatever, we can name the whales. And yeah, we know relatively a lot about these individual whales, but also at the same time, we don't. Like, sometimes they disappear for years at a time and we don't know where they go. It could be years before we find out if or assume that they're dead or not. There's still a lot that we don't know, particularly in the areas between the Gulf of St. Lawrence and, Florida, Georgia. There's that mid-Atlantic where it's still a bit of a black hole, which is surprising. When you say there's so few of them.
Is that the area where the great white sharks and the seals have returned?
I think so, all along there, yeah.
Right? It's that same migratory area where they disappeared from overfishing decades ago. And now with warming temperatures, it's allowing migration patterns to resume and grow into a new area.
Yeah, everything's changing, is it one thing that we're finding. One of the things that, I think people come up with politicians in particular, they're like, well, why can't we just tag them and then we'll know where they are? And it would, easy peasy to just tag them all. But because these whales are so critically endangered, and they don't have a dorsal fin, so it's not as easy to tag as some other animals. And when they do get tagged, they tend to get infected, and it's just too much of a risk right now to open these whales up to more risk of infection and disease. So tagging has been very, very limited, I'd say, till date, other than suction tags, which don't last that long. So we're trying to learn about them, but it's not as easy as just like tag all the whales and then we'll know where they are at all times. It's still very reliant on visual detection, acoustic detection. There's gliders going underwater. I know Canada's been investing in satellite detection, trying to, use satellites to detect these whales from space and be able to identify them from other whales. But that's the first step in, letting ships know where the whales are. So ideally they can slow down or try to avoid the areas where the whales are.
And that seems reasonable. Again, if we know where the migratory paths are, we know some of the areas they like to frequent. Without knowing a lot about how shipping commercially works, I imagine there is an opportunity to beam that information out to ships and to oceanographic planners and navigators, whoever else is involved, to say, hey, right now we know there is a group of whales, moving in this direction. Avoid this general area the best you can.
Yeah. And there are some,
and it should be doable.
There are some areas where ships are not supposed to go. There are in Canada. There's voluntary and mandatory slowdown areas, depending on the time of year and if whales are sighted. But it's really hard to enforce,
Yeah.
and getting the message out there and the detection of the whales. It's complicated all around, I think. But we do know that when ships slow down to less than 10 knots, the chance of killing a whale is reduced significantly. So that's kind of our one message, to try to get vessels to slow down to that 10 knot limit.
And that's one of those things where I think most people, if it were put to them this way of, can you wait another 6 hours to get your delivery or pay an extra 5 cents on your batteries that are coming overseas? Most people would say, yeah, I can, if you give me the context for it. But outside of that, what are things people can be doing, whether they are, in a position to work with wildlife or not, to try and help, to try and sort of boost any efforts ongoing and reduce the impact they might be having unknowingly on some of this?
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess, one of the things for any listeners who might be on the coast or going whale watching is there's an app that can be downloaded called Whale Alert, and it's our citizen science app. So you can one, see where whales have been reported in the area, and two, you can report a whale if you're on the water and you happen to see one, and that will inform management, and it will also let other vessels know that there's whales in the area and that they should slow down. But for those of us who aren't on the water or don't get a chance to go out and see whales on a regular basis, I think probably one of the best things we can do is contact our member of parliament, contact the Minister of Environment, Minister of Fisheries, let them know that we do care about these whales. We haven't forgotten about them, and we want Canada to do everything it can to keep protecting them and not let them go extinct.
People who want to learn more about this, because we're not even touching the tip of the iceberg when it comes to right whales, marine scientists, and a lot of the issues facing wildlife as a whole in that regard. For folks who are interested in learning more about this, getting involved, or learning more about some of the really impressive technology you've talked about, where is a good place for them to get started?
Well, our page is actually rightwhales.org. And you can go there and you can sort of see the breadth of all of IFAW's work that we're doing to protect right whales, everything from the vessel slowdowns to working with fishermen, and the whole range of efforts that are being done to protect the species.
To learn more about Sheryl and IFAW's work on right whales, visit rightwhales.org and follow IFAW on your preferred social media app. Sheryl, thank you for sharing your time with us. And dear listener, thank you too. Knowing there are thousands of compassionate individuals who want to learn about solutions and how to protect across Canada and the world fills me with hope every single day. Remember to follow me on Instagram at HowieMichael and Blue Sky at Defender Radio, and to subscribe or follow Defender Radio on your preferred podcast app to keep getting new episodes. Until next time, I'm Michael Howie for Defender Radio and the Fur Bearers, reminding you to stay informed and stay strong.